If you've spent any amount of time studying the Second World War, you already know that the resistance fighters were not superhuman. They were ordinary men and women who stepped into extraordinary demands. That is precisely why their mental toughness is worth studying today. For the first minute, I want to pull you straight into the mindset these people carried, because it wasn't built in a training camp or a government facility. It was built in basements, forests, mountain hideouts, safe houses, prison cells, and on streets patrolled by enemies. These fighters learned to bend without breaking, to act decisively under pressure, and to preserve their humanity while surrounded by cruelty. When you understand how they did it, you walk away with tools that can apply to modern crisis situations, leadership roles, and survival scenarios. So if you're a serious history enthusiast or survival-minded thinker, this is where the real lessons live, and they're far more practical than most people expect. Mental toughness begins when you accept that fear must be managed rather than eliminated. Resistance fighters lived with constant fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of capture, fear of reprisals against their families. They never waited for fear to disappear, because it never did. What they mastered instead was the ability to operate with fear sitting right beside them. The French maquisards often described fear as something that sharpened their senses, forcing them to double-check maps, rehearse escape routes, and refine signals. To apply this today, stop expecting high-pressure situations to feel comfortable. When you step into uncertainty, acknowledge the fear, label it, and let it exist without letting it steer the vehicle. One practical step is to pause for 3 seconds before acting in a stressful moment, long enough for your thinking brain to override your survival panic. Resistance fighters lived their entire operational lives inside those 3 seconds. You develop resilience when you build routines in unstable environments. Across occupied Europe, resistance cells thrived on consistency, even in chaos. They used fixed meeting times, reliable communication habits, and predictable verification steps. That structure served as a psychological anchor. In your life, especially during unpredictable seasons, routines become mental armor. So, it's important to establish a morning sequence, maybe a weekly planning ritual, or even just a reliable communication schedule with your team. The Dutch resistance, they relied on such habits to maintain clarity when everything else around them shifted, sometimes by the hour. Routine, let me tell you, is not boring. It is survival. Clarity of mission, really, it strengthens mental stamina. Those WW2 resistance fighters, they were never confused about why they were fighting. Their purpose was as sharp as a blade. That clarity honestly carried them through hunger, cold, and overwhelming odds. The Polish Home Army, for instance, knew their cause so deeply that even when operations failed, the mission did not disappear. Now you can apply this by, writing down your exact objective in difficult tasks or long-term projects. The mind, you see, fights harder when it knows what it's fighting for. Without clarity, people burn out fast, but with it, they endure almost anything. Patience becomes a weapon when you understand the long game. Resistance work was slow. Months could pass before an opportunity presented itself. The sabotage of a railway line might require weeks of scouting, planning, and waiting for one gap in patrol timing. Modern people often expect instant results, but mental toughness comes from training yourself to tolerate long periods of preparation. If you're working toward a demanding goal, train your patience by breaking down the mission into phases and committing to each one without rushing to the finale. The resistance fighters survived because they understood that decisive moments belong to the patient. Adaptability grows when you accept constant change as normal. Nothing in resistance warfare stayed stable. Safe houses burned, contacts disappeared, equipment failed. Fighters survived by adapting faster than the enemy expected. They changed routes, codes, identities, and tactics without emotional hesitation. To apply this, practice controlled disruption. Once a week, intentionally change a routine, tool, or method, and, force yourself to operate with the new pattern. That sort of flexibility becomes instinctive, much like how SOE-trained operatives learn to adjust under pressure without losing their nerve. Trust is a deliberate choice, not just an emotional hope. Resistance fighters did not trust blindly. They established verification systems, passwords, challenge and response phrases, and layers of compartmentalization. Trust was, built through consistent behavior. The lesson here is that mental toughness includes protecting your mind from unnecessary stress by creating systems that minimize betrayal, confusion, or miscommunication. In practical terms, clarify expectations with the people you rely on and make verification standard, not personal. Mental endurance increases when you prepare for worst-case scenarios. One of the hardest truths of resistance work was accepting that capture was always possible. Many groups rehearsed what to do when arrested, what information could be safely revealed, and how long they needed to hold out to protect their network. That preparation reduced panic because they had already walked through disaster in their minds. If you want to build this same mental muscle, conduct periodic scenario reviews. Ask yourself what you would do if a plan failed, if a partner backed out, or if conditions reversed. Planning for failure does not weaken you. It hardens you. Moral alignment strengthens mental stability. Despite immense pressure, many resistance fighters operated within personal ethical boundaries. They drew lines they refused to cross, and those lines protected their sense of self. When you know what values you refuse to compromise, you avoid the psychological collapse that comes when a person betrays their own principles. So, apply this by defining your non-negotiables before you enter stressful situations. When your identity stays intact, your mind stays stronger, Community amplifies courage more than individual willpower. Even the strongest resistance fighters rarely worked alone. Community offered accountability, encouragement, and shared risk. The Norwegian resistance often said that courage was contagious inside a tight-knit cell. If you want practical mental toughness today, build your own resistance cell in everyday life. A circle of reliable people who pursue similar goals and challenge you to stay disciplined. Lone wolves burn out. Networks endure. If you found value in these lessons from World War II resistance fighters, make sure you subscribe to the channel, share this guide with fellow history buffs, and help us keep these powerful stories alive.